Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Chat with Friends. This series where I just invite somebody on, whoever is interested, whoever's interesting in a lot of it's Twitter. As much as I try to cut back my Twitter usage, every once in a while something happens. And so there was a thread that was posted on Twitter recently by my friend over here. I've used this opportunity to get to know him, and we've been talking before the chat, having a real good time. You know him as the Space-Biff. He has a very, very prominent blog, so prominent that a lot of board game designers are like, I hope that I get my game lit up on the Space-Biff because that is a marker of that I have arrived. He has that much notoriety in this space. So that he is a very interesting person. We wanted to have him on for a long time, and we finally made it happen. We're going to talk about content. We'll talk all about that. But first, let me introduce Dan Thurot, the Space-Biff. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Jason. This is exciting.
All right. I'm so excited. It's like I'm knocking off all my board game celebrities, man. All right. So yeah, like as I said, so we could talk about anything. I mean, you read the Space-Biff, the blogs, and there's also a podcast. I mean, this is a very intelligent man with a lot of different thoughts, just kind of like swirling around a lot. Now I'm pumping you up. You got to live up to
I
this
know. Now I'm going to have to use some real 50-cent words.
Although what I will say is I think that the intelligence is very countercultural. We're gonna have kind of a countercultural, critical of the board gaming like scenario today. Like we're gonna lay down some criticisms, and it isn't like, okay, we're gonna criticize you, we're canceling things. It's just, we're gonna throw out some questions in one particular phrase, but we'll get to that in a second. But first, because it's your first time on the show, please introduce yourself to the audience and let them know what you are all about.
Okay, so my name is Dan Thurot. I am a historian. That's what I do most of my time. I'm currently on sabbatical because I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old daughter, and so it was one of the nice things about academia is it's a little bit more flexible than working in healthcare, which is what my wife works in. So when my daughter was born, I took off some time so that I get to hang out with them in the morning, and then I work in the afternoon. Which sometimes I say that and people are like, well, that's not like a career, but which is just such a depressing, what a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, right. Like when did work become drudgery? Like who kidnapped work and made it into drudgery? I don't like that.
I know. Stockholm syndromed work into thinking it was awful. No, it's so that's my favorite thing. That's probably my primary career right now, is just hanging out with my 2 daughters every day. And that is that's the most fun thing in my life. Second most fun thing is I do write a site called Space-Biff that focuses a lot on let's talk about board games, and let's talk about them as though they're cultural artifacts. What are these things? What does it mean to our culture that these things are here? And try to talk about them in that light instead of, do you want to buy this? Is this thing worth $20 or $40? So that's what my I would say I'm about. And
let's rank the board games, and let's go ahead. I'm going to take 10 board games, and I'm going to do this, and we are going to try to not kind of go off too much in that tip. But yes, there is a sense in which we are going to be critical of the way we approach board games and board game coverage in general, and we're going to try to introduce a little bit of a different wrinkle on it, and people know where I'm coming from because I did a whole video called "It's Not Just a Game," right? And I talked about it in terms of mental health. So like when we're a lot of times, like if people getting mad or upset or it's like it's not going well at the table, what's the thing that you say? It's like, come on, man, it's just a game.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not. It's not. Like we wouldn't spend all this time. We wouldn't spend all this money if it was quote unquote just a game.
Right. Well, I wish I'd watched that beforehand. I've been thinking a lot about the Magic Circle and how, Huizinga, when he proposes it, it's this space where we can enter into it and think about ourselves in a counterfactual way. But our modern society has almost hijacked it to mean I get to be a jerk.
I get a break.
Yeah, like I get to sit here and be a jerk to you, and if you're losing, you just have to suck it up for 2 hours.
Hmm.
And it's just such an unfortunate way that we have this beautiful theory about what play can mean to us, and we've just turned it into something it was never meant to be all over again.
So as I thought was going to happen, we're going to have bring up all sorts of stuff. So maybe we'll circle back to that concept because I do have a lot of thoughts about the magic circle. But there is a topic that I wanted to address today, and the reason I'm addressing this topic, I actually was going to think about doing a monologue on this because this has been something that's been I'm thinking about in the kind of rumbling in the back of my brain, and it's like a reflection on what I'm doing, like what am I making. Right. I at this point, Shelf Stories is almost a year old.
Mm-hmm.
Yay. And I've made over 100 videos. Right. And just,
Wow.
Yeah.
In
Right.
a year?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's amazing.
So, sometimes it's playthroughs, sometimes just me turning on the phone and talking for like 5 minutes or
Yeah.
I mean, or the chats, like, I do weekly chats and that's 50 of them right there. You just turn on Zoom and have an interesting conversation. So what am I doing? And what do I call it? And there was a poll recently on, I forget exactly which one of the groups it was, but I was a Tim Vernig who works with Thunderworks was saying, okay, what do you call yourself? And the biggest, like the highest thing was content creator.
Yeah.
So like there's a bunch of options, media and reviewer and, or whatever, video photographer. There are these different options, but like content creator was the top one. And you had a tweet. You could when you talk about content, and that's what got me started. So if you remember what you said in your tweet about content creator, go for it.
Okay, man, I should just pull it up or something. I'm so unprepared. Well, basically, I should hedge this a little bit because there's always this sense when I say something like this that someone assumes that I mean that I think that term is beneath me. And that is not the case. I think that a content creator is a thing. And furthermore, I think that's a valuable thing, especially if we're approaching the hobby in terms of, I read reviews. And here I'm saying defining a review as something that I read in order to make a purchase decision, right? Because I don't have all the money in the world. I read reviews for all sorts of things. Right. For movies, for washing machines, for board games.
I just did it for hiking boots. I just read a bunch of reviews for hiking boots to see if I could rock with the one that was on Prime Day. And I shouldn't be saying that I did something on Prime Day. But...
Well, no, and I did too. I bought a vacuum cleaner on Prime Day. And of course I read reviews. So that can be valuable. And other senses in which content can be meant, that can also be valuable. Yeah. So I'm not saying that I'm above this. I'm just saying that we use it in such a broad way, and it's so hard for me to divorce it from its historical context that it's just imprecise. I tend to regard what I do in many ways as sort of an antithesis to content creation. Mm-hmm. That I just feel like it's really weird to take these, these two roles that are meant to be set against each other, really. And call them the same thing,
like content and reviewer.
Yeah,
those two things.
Yeah, or even like content and critic, or even if we need a catch-all term, which I think is fine at a certain level. We're just talking about different stuff. I really do just like media. Right. In media studies, we might sit down and examine the entire spectrum of what's being produced around a medium, and so I like media. But content creation to me occupies a very particular slot within media of a medium. Mm-hmm. And when people reach out, basically my comment was when people reach out and say, hey, I love your content. First of all, I totally appreciate the compliment. I'm not going to sit and nitpick a compliment. Right. It might make me feel awkward, but I'm going to say, oh, thank you. That's I'm glad. I'm glad that it's been meaningful to you. But my beef is mostly just that it's inaccurate. Mm-hmm. How do you feel? Do you feel like you're producing content right now?
Yeah, right. So, okay. And this is the thing that I emailed you, right? So my gut instinct, my gut instinct. I come from where you come from. I'm a little bit of a older person, uh, and I remember the internet when it kind of began, and the idea of content, right? So let's now, let's get into it. So like we just set the scene. Right now the term is pretty accepted,
Yeah.
right? And now we're not talking about like content. I'll say content with a small c, right? Just
Sure.
content, right?
Yeah.
The way that I learned it and the way I grew up with it, when it was content, what I'm calling content with a big C, like in a big scary content.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by content? What I mean by content is like the listicles, the flashy, like, okay, here's 7 reasons to do this, and here is a bunch of pictures of cats falling off the chair, and while you're watching the picture of the cat, right in the middle of the cat falling off a chair, there's an ad.
Yeah.
And and like the content in the way of like, I'm gonna fill your feed with garbage, anything to grab your attention.
Yeah.
Right. And we're gonna, and when I have your attention, then I have your data, and I can sell your data and do the whole thing, do the whole internet thing. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I think, and I don't know if that's where you mean, I think I think we're probably close to the same page. Let me know. But like, that's what when I hear content, I hear like stuff that is generated to just fill time, waste time, steal attention, just poop in our brains, take it out, and just like commodify my attention into something that you can sell, and it's gonna like make my life worse. Because that was time that I could have spent doing something enriching and something fun and something learning, whatever. But I stood there watching content.
Yeah.
And meaningless content.
And I agree, especially in the sense when you talk about commoditizing something. So I think that, when we look at the history of what we would term content marketing, we do see a lot of quality content. Content as a concept doesn't catch on because it's bad.
Right.
In fact, it catches on.
The original thing is like, I'm going to fill your brain with crap.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the idea of content taken to its kind of logical, most bang for your buck, cheapest. It's taffy. It's just, no one likes it. No one wants to eat taffy, but if that's the candy you have, that's what you'll eat. And when we look at the history of content marketing, it can be so many things. Like some of the original ideas of like cross promotion, which is really where content has its birthplace, is really useful stuff. You have big giants like Johnson and Johnson publishing manuals on how to treat wounds.
Right.
And that's great. Multiple times in my life, I have been advantaged by knowing how to treat a wound. But Johnson and Johnson was also doing that to sell Band-Aids.
Right.
And because in that manual, it talks about, well, here's bandages. And of course, Johnson and Johnson's bandages already have these features, so they reduce the steps. And there's all these things, John Deere's the furrow, the Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. All of these things are useful. They're good. But then what happens is when the internet comes along, exactly what you're describing happens. Where, so these companies come along and they're going, well, rather than just doing something quality, why don't we just do a lot of it?
Quantity.
Yeah.
We're going to shift from quality to quantity.
Right. And we're going to stuff you so full of taffy that you're not going to be hungry for anything else. You can't have a steak dinner. You don't get a salad. You don't get chips. You don't get fries. You get taffy down your throat. And so when I say that, of course, that sounds demeaning, and it seems like it's contradicting what I said earlier. I think that there are a lot of people who don't realize they're making content in that sense, that they are basically working for a publisher in this industry to sell board games, and that there's an expectation that the content you generate is therefore going to be positive. It's going to be fluffy. It's going to be kind of lightly humorous. It's going to be appealing in this superficial way without really saying anything. It's meant to fill you up. Now, that's, of course, not true of all content.
Sure.
But it's true of a lot of content.
Right. I think, okay, so I don't want to be really clear. I think we're trying to be careful here because we don't want to say anything like bad,
Right.
about the
When I
people that
don't
are
want to be
actually
like,
making stuff.
right. And I don't want to
Right.
be like, Rado makes empty content.
Yeah.
When
Empty calories, Rado. I know you're watching, Rado.
I'm
I know
calling you
you're
out,
watching.
Rado. That is not what I mean. And I think there's some wonderful stuff going on.
Right. I think like so maybe it's like this. So it's like, okay, you have a bunch of people, and to me, like, having done this and how hard this is or can be, like, anybody who sits in front of a camera and makes something and has like an audience is like, to me, that's pretty valuable. And I'll talk to that about that a little bit later. But like when we make the thing, then we put it and we post it, right? And we post on YouTube, we post, or you post on your blog or whatever it is, then it enters like a kind of a capitalist bloodstream.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, it's that process that turns our productivity and our creativity into content.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to kind of think about that?
Yeah. And that's what I mean when I say a lot of people are producing content sort of unwittingly. I've done the same. I've written, especially in the first years when I was writing board game reviews, before I had a clear idea of what I wanted to do, whenever you start doing anything, what do? You imitate, right? And so there were a lot of forum reviews, reviews didn't tend to be negative. And I did the same thing. And I shouldn't blame that entirely on imitation. It was also just me, coming into the hobby and not having developed a sense of taste, not having played enough stuff that I'm like, oh no, this game is garbage. I was just happy to be playing a game. And so of course I was writing positive coverage for it. And then of course that immediately gets picked up. It's being shared by the publisher. And none of that on its own is inherently bad. It's that entire ecosystem that really leverages that and it reduces you from here's a work that somebody spent time on into here's this disposable thing that's just kind of flitting past your eyes, like a dream in Willy Wonka's weird, boat ride cavern. It has no meaning anymore.
Right. To describe like the process of content, right? So like when we take what we produce and it becomes content, right? With a capital C, content. And the reason I'm using capital C is I highly recommend, and I mentioned this to you, Bo Burnham's Inside.
Yes.
It is a wonderful Netflix series, and he is a biting critique of a lot of things, but one of the things he talks about is content. We have mountains of content. And the point of the movie is that his life is empty. Because that's what his content. Content is designed for quantity and it's designed to grab your attention.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't get enough attention. And that's part of that. That's part of the deal. So then when you putting out a creative thing, and we'll talk about like what makes a thing meaningful, like in a little bit, but like this is what happens when you sap the meaning.
Yeah.
Right. And you put it into like the capitalist bloodstream. So it's like, it's floating. It's almost like, these wonderful little like tributaries, and they're kind of flowing into this big river. And full disclosure, like we're I think neither of us are like huge fans of capitalism, and we have our own criticisms of what's going on.
Yeah. And this is one of those things where I feel like I have to measure my words. We're just, I'm such not a fan of this sort of lurching capitalism that refuses to examine itself.
Right. Yes.
Even Adam Smith, when people are like, oh, Wealth of Nations explains all this stuff. And I'm going, you need to read Wealth of Nations. Mm-hmm. It is not talking about this.
Right. It's not talking about as like an article of faith almost. Like it's become kind of a religion. Of like the market will solve things, and like just put it in the market, and things will kind of work out. It's like, how is it going to work out? What are the mechanics of it? What if it doesn't work out? What are we going to do then? It's like, oh.
Well, and it's been sort of co-opted into this weird way where I'm supposed to believe that the levers of the market should never be touched by an outside force. That's really not what Adam Smith is saying.
Right.
And, he when he's writing Wealth of Nations, I mean, many people forget that it's basically published on the eve of the American Revolution, in part because of a mercantile system that's being abusive and has a bunch of enforced monopolies. Mm-hmm. Those monopolies don't go away on their own. They're broken up.
Right.
And so when people bring this up, it's just, we have this capitalist system that I wish we would, if we're not going to do anything to change that system, it's not going to improve.
Or at least question it, or at least like
Right.
problematize what's happening. So like, yeah, this is what happens when I invite a historian on the show.
It's just, I just, the context in which something was written or created, I think is so important to what is it actually saying? Well, it's saying more than the text. It's responding to arguments in its day. And the same is true right now, right? I mean, like, so right there on your shelf, you've got Space Alert. Space Alert makes so much more sense when you understand kind of this post-Soviet context.
Yeah.
That it's basically what would have happened if the Soviet Union had won the Cold War. Well, instead of Star Trek, you get kind of this dumpy, mass-produced future. And things like that, I think, really enrich our understanding. But there are so many forces pushing against that enriched understanding. Right. That's just tragic, I find.
And that's what we're talking about. Like, we're talking about that the commodification, the contentification,
right?
And we have to be very careful. I know people call themselves content creators, and that's the context. But we're talking about this other context in which we understand content. I think it's getting lost. Like, I think it's getting lost when we just call ourselves content creators to kind of call it a day. Like, it might be a little bit of a problem, because it's like, I really in my gut will, like, you asked me before, am I making content? And like there's a little part of it that's like, no.
Right.
No. Because it's, it's happy and meaningless and everything. But like, we have to be careful that when it's entering into that capitalist bloodstream and that marketing bloodstream, like really we're critiquing marketing.
Yeah.
And I know you have a lot to say about, like, when it comes to like the marketing end of board games and all that.
Well, and that's one of those things that I have been really surprised at how much trouble I've gotten in for just, I wrote an essay a little while ago, and I think this is maybe what you're alluding to, entitled "The Price is Wrong," where I just wrote about, I think that it would behoove critics and reviewers to consider not talking about price. Right. And I used some pretty strong language in there. And the reason I did that, a few people have correctly identified that as a bit of a rhetorical tool. That yes, I'm speaking strongly. And the reason I am is because the default is to have commoditized board games so fully that there's no other way to have that conversation than by shouting. And so for me, I pointed out that to me, a board game should not be its price. And to say, well, a board game, but we have to buy board games, except that captures such a small slice of our experience. In fact, I would argue that the vast majority of people who play board games aren't the ones buying the majority of board games. Mm-hmm. So in my group, I am the only one who actively purchases or is sent board games. Everyone else, they
along for the ride, baby.
Yeah, they're along for the ride.
What did Dan bring today?
Exactly. And in a lot of the other groups I've visited, that tends to be the situation, that everybody might buy 2 or 3 games, but that means that between all of them, they're playing 15 games. And by the same token, you can also trade for games. You can find games at Goodwill. You can steal a game. There are so many ways to experience the range of this human thing we call play. As expressed in the tabletop hobby, that to reduce it to the commercial, I just find incredibly reductive. Mm-hmm. And how am I supposed to quantify that for you? So, I've met you and I've talked to you and I like you, but I have no idea what $1 is worth to you. You might have a great career. You might be richer than me or poorer than me. You might be homeless for all I know. This Calyx that you've got here of board games might be at your buddy's house. I know so little about your situation that me telling you that a game would be worth $40 but not $65. And now we have to talk about people in New Zealand. And now we have to talk about, I have readers in other, on all sorts of continents, in all sorts of situations. I just find it impossible to even have that conversation. And people were upset that I pointed that out. And I had a lot of people saying, this is a bad idea. This is really going to tank your site. And I've been doing it for like 3 or 4 years already. This was just finally when I said, hey, I'm not doing this. And that's when people got upset, is when I said, I'm not going to talk about board game prices. But yeah, for me, it's an attempt to both acknowledge that yes, my when a publisher sends me a game, of course there's that expectation that it's marketing, but that doesn't mean that I, as someone who's trying to review the game or critique the game, can't be trying to at least approach this thing more culturally or artistically. um, I don't think I can fully escape marketing, just the way I don't think anyone fully escapes, their complicity in a complex system like capitalism or like a nation state. But I can at least try to elevate something else. Let's talk about these things as artistic, on their artistic merits, or as narratives, or as things that teach us something about ourselves or about history. I just want that conversation to be more pronounced than the commercial.
And relating into this current discussion, if board games kind of like reduce the price and value proposition for a lot of people, then what we're doing reduces often to clicks.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the video and the audio, and that's that version of it. So it's like when you measure content, and that's where we really get into like what content is. Measuring content pretty much comes down to how many clicks.
Yeah.
How many shares, how much engagement, right? So like a publisher will say, and it's funny because they'll like, publishers tend to call all of us reviewers. It's like,
yeah.
It's like, how much do you pay for how much do I charge for your review? And how about your reviews? And it's like, I don't do reviews on my site, but like, they just say that anyway. So
yeah,
as an example of how loose these words are. But anyway, but a publisher will tend to, some are better, but like most of them will look at the numbers.
Yeah.
How many subs? How many, your individual pieces? Where are you in social media? Are you on TikTok? Are you on Instagram? Are you doing this? And it's a reality of the system. It's nothing against the publishers. Like, they have to, because margins are so slim. They have to like kind of maximize whenever they give it. But like, the effect is, when evaluating content, it's about how high the number is.
Yeah.
It's, with the algorithm, like, who sees this thing? The higher the number, the more likely that person is even going to see it. Right. Yeah. So then and then when we get into that mindset of like, okay, now I'm producing content with a big C, right? And now then it becomes a numbers game, or it can be that's the trap.
Yeah.
And so how do I do things like that's happened in my podcast before? So it's like, oh, wait a minute. My podcast, the bigger numbers were for top 10 list. And for the longest time, I resisted top 10 list. Then towards the end, I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I think I ended the run of the podcast in like 10 straight top 10 episodes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to end it on a bang.
And it's you ended with your best numbers ever.
Right. And then it's like, so it, we want to say like we're artists, we want to say we're creative, we want to say, and we do whatever, but there's this constant pull, right? And that the constant pull towards like quantity and measurement and engagement, and that's the language to me. Whenever people talk about content, that's what it triggers in me. I'm not saying it needs to trigger that in you, but I wanted to take this time to really reflect and say, I want to at least have that conversation.
Yeah.
Of the engagement and the numbers, and it's like, that's what calling something content means. And it's like, oh, let's really unpack this and really consider whether we want to own the full availance of what that word means.
One of the things that I think is the case is that it's so easy to look at those things and become cynical. Like, so on your recommendation, I watched Inside by Bo Burnham, and I'm glad you recommended it to me because I loved it. And of course, there's this irony at its heart, right? That Bo Burnham is producing this thing saying content is empty. And here it's probably like the most popular thing he's ever done. Is he deriving satisfaction from calling his work empty if that's his work? And I think that we see something similar in a lot of great work, that there are commercial restraints, and that often there are paymasters, and there are, you can't fully escape it. Right. So it's easy to become cynical, right? But I think it's actually very useful to look at those things and recognize that often that tension is where very good art comes from. There's kind of that old truism, and I don't know how actually true it is, but how do you ruin like an artist's next work? Give them an unlimited budget, unlimited time, any actor they could want, whatever. And instead of producing something lean and meaningful, they create this like bloated mess. And I can't help but think of like when Arrested Development moved to Netflix.
Yeah.
And suddenly like they had all this money and time and they didn't have to be 22 minutes long. And I was watching it just like bored.
Right.
And I think that's true. I think that tension that kind of forces us to try to rise above it, the commercial concerns, despite being bound by them. That's an opportunity. But it's very hard to labor under those constraints and kind of keep perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And keep a sense of quality. And so like, I've been thinking a lot, and before you even posted a tweet and everything happening, I was thinking of a lot of like, okay, what does it mean to produce something meaningful, right? Because that's what I ultimately Shelf Stories, so I put my gaming stuff on other channels. Like I work for the Dice Tower, I work for the One Star Co-op Shop. I'm gonna put like stuff on the table that's gonna be for those things. I wanted to keep Shelf Stories, this channel, as like my outlet to talk to people and connect with people and produce meaningful content, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have no other word for it. Like what, I'll say meaningful media, right? I mean,
Sure.
Meaningful media. And what do I mean by that? I mean like stuff that is, like makes people better by thinking, or by kind of like opening some minds, opening some pathways, or connecting with people. Just the raw act of connection is a meaningful thing. Getting the comments and talking and people seeing my face and everything, that's meaningful. And the third thing is just something that stands on its own artistically as an aesthetic experience. Sure. Without function. So like there's a part of art that can be very functional. It's like, it does this and it does this, but there's another part of art that is just like, it's there. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? No.
Sure.
Does it do anything but give you a laugh or make you feel something? That to me, that's meaningful too. And it's like, if you're on that spectrum of doing one of those things, or maybe in the best thing, multiple of those things, then you're doing something meaningful, right? And that's what I really try to go for. And my struggle is, how do I continue to produce what I consider meaningful work and just inject it into the bloodstream of content and not get kind of lost in, because I'll have certain videos that just go viral. Usually it's when I respond to some like creator who did a faux pas, who did a cultural faux pas, and I'm responding to, because sure, the people who are following up on that. But that's content too, because it's attention grabbing. It's there's a person responding, and I try to respond meaningfully, but like I'm entering the bloodstream of there's a fight,
right?
And that it messes with me. It's like, I'm trying to make something meaningful, but am I following this? And is it tempting me to kind of continue to respond and shaping my content in certain ways? I don't know.
Yeah. What do you feel like would persuade you that what you do is meaningful?
I mean, so there's a difference between stuff that you watch and stuff that's worth watching, right? And so content with like a big C is like stuff that is watched. And like every single thing that I make, I want to be able to say, even if it gets 15 views, it's worth watching. Even if it doesn't grab somebody's attention, like it grabbed my attention, the thing that I made. And I know if it had a bigger platform, because there's some people that can they're so big, they can like look sideways and they get 50,000 views.
Yeah, right.
So like, and so like I have to kind of say that to myself, where it's like, okay, look, I can't care about the views. I have to put stuff out there that is worth watching. And for one of those three reasons, because it's art, because it's a piece of art, because it's connecting with people, or it's just like something that makes people think and, grow in some way, informs them in some way. And it's a struggle, because sometimes like I'll put something out and it gets to 15 views, and I'll try to kind of reassure myself that way. But entering into that bloodstream, it's a difficult thing. Like, am I, should I alter my content to like get more views? It's always a struggle for me.
Yeah.
What about yourself? Like you strike me as somebody that is very like, this is what I do. and what if you like, you don't, you don't. Like you strike me as
That's
somebody like
fair.
that,
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
I don't know, like what is happening behind the hood for you?
For me, the first couple of years I was writing about board games, I had a very small audience, and I think I reached a point where I was saying to myself, I feel like I'm getting something out of writing this. Um, I personally, I feel that something is meaningful if it causes any level of discovery, and and I'm using a very broad definition of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
That can mean that I discover something about myself or the topic. That can mean that I discover that I liked a thing. That it doesn't have to be uh, a major revelation to count as discovery.
Right.
And so for me, I find that process of discovery in the act of writing about the board game. For me, the hobby really is playing and then writing about the game. If I'm not going to write about a game, I'm probably actually not going to play it. But I love that sense of discovery. I love sitting down, and I have a general feeling about how I feel about a game, obviously, but it's not until I start writing that I discover, I liked this aspect, even though I didn't like the game, or I wish it had done this or that. For me, that is so much of what I derive meaning from.
Mm.
And I hope that other people, when they read my writing, I hope somebody gets that out of it. But it's true that, yes, I tend to be a little, if someone doesn't like what I do, I'm sure they can find something.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that line from Welcome to the Internet, where if none of this interests you, you'd be the first. I'm not for everybody. I'm not going to try to be for everybody. I'm for me.
Right. And I think for me, on Shelf Stories, I want people to make critical links. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That at the end of the day, when I do my monologues and when I do these things, I want people to think of something a different way. So I guess along the lines of what you're trying to do. And when I mentioned the other stuff, like, there are people that kind of emphasize other things. Right. So like I follow Paula Deming, she's We'll Watch It Played
Sure.
now. And she did like this today. She did this rap. It was like a ABC board game rap thing. It was silly as hell. it was like it theoretically could be like considered kind of vapid or whatever it is, but like
Sure.
From another angle, she's doing art.
Yeah.
Like it's she's changing the paradigm of like how we engage in board games. Her and or like Katia Howitson, she did the board game Mosaics. I don't know if you've seen those online, but like she takes the
Right.
pieces and she makes it like the different things. And to me, that's also meaningful for them.
Yeah.
And there's so many people doing so many meaningful things. Mick and Starla from our board game family, their thing is connection and connection with diversity. That's
Sure.
meaningful too. So there's a lot of different ways which we can define meaning.
Right.
And it's like, I guess it does make me a little bit sad to put the content blanket over all of that.
Yeah.
And even though we do need a catch-all term, maybe media is that catch-all term, but like the fact that we're putting the content catch-all, and because we might know what we mean, but I have a feeling that there's a lot of people out there that are like they're going to look at Paula, you, me, Mika Starla, and just look at board game people.
Yeah.
That's what kills me. The idea that like that word can enable somebody on the audience end that's like way removed. They're not on Twitter. They're just like kind of following in, and they see all this wonderful diversity, and they just look at it and go, "Oh, they cover board games. Great."
Yeah. And it's one sheet covering it all.
Right.
Yeah. And I am a linguistic descriptivist. One of the things that I think it was Suzanne raised the objection that younger people
Right.
have a different view on the word content. And you know what? Fair enough.
Words get reappropriated all the time. Like right. I totally get that.
Yeah. And that's not a big deal. Like I said, if someone says, "Hey, I love your content," I'm not going to like, oh,
how dare you?
I'm not going to retire to my fainting couch. It's all fine. I appreciate the compliment. It's just that I'm picky about words that I use. And if other people aren't as picky, I'm not going to argue with them all that hard. unless they use bespoke incorrectly or something. I don't know.
Like the trying to be intellectual word and it just kind of falls flat.
Yeah, yeah,
I guess like, so this happens, so every once in a while. So like you get like a post on, on Twitter or on Instagram or something like that, where people are trying to like they'll post about like, getting burned out. Right.
yeah.
They get, it's burnout. I don't know what I'm doing. And to me, like the major source of burnout is when your art and what you produce get caught in the content trap. Like
That's incredible.
I have more review copies than I can play or I want to play,
Yeah,
or I have a thing that I do, but I'm no longer in discovery mode with the thing that I do. I just kind of like do the things. It's the
yeah,
same segment. It's the same that people expect it. So it's like, oh, when you change, people are like, well, what are you doing changing it? Like my old podcast was a solo games podcast. And whenever I would do like, towards the end of the run, I did like other stuff. I'd always get pushed back. It's like, wait a minute, where'd the solo game go? Is that coming back next week? Oh, Jesus. So that's why I built the channel to be kind of this channel to be a little more open. But like it becomes this, and I don't want to like say bad things about the audience, but I guess it's like the consumer mindset
yeah.
that I'm talking about a little bit more, where it's like, you have your audience, but the audience there's expectations that built into what the audience is expecting. And then the content creator, the creator is falling into those, okay, I have to, the quantity trap, I guess.
Right. I'm loving what you're saying because it's one of those things where a lot of people have reached out to me to ask about burnout.
Yeah.
And, there are some absolutely wonderful voices in this hobby that are no longer creating whatever they were doing, content or media. And a lot of the time, sometimes it's something yucky like harassment, but a lot of the time it's just burnout. They got tired of making it. And that's an insightful point, Jason, that I wonder if, when are you really doing what you want to be doing, or are you doing it out of some sense of obligation? Because when people have asked, well, have you ever felt burnt out? Well, sure. I mean, obviously there have been times where I've been tired or not as zoned in or whatever, but for the most part, no. I really love what I do. That isn't to say this is a full-time career or anything. It's a hobby, but I do write about around 100 games a year. And no, I don't feel burned out. I love it. I think it's exciting. I think it's fun. I think, I'm always discovering something new. I'm always learning from board games. So yeah, when you mentioned that you approach things from kind of more of a mental health standpoint, I love what you're saying. And to me, this is one of the reasons that I love engaging with this hobby, is that, we can put a shared artifact on the table that is so crystallized. Space Alert has one set of rules, whether I'm playing it or you're playing it, but we're going to get very different things out of it. That sense of discovery, I don't think it taps out with just one person. But yeah, I think maybe you're right. That could be a place where burnout is coming in.
When you get caught in the content trap.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get caught in kind of this obligation loop.
And when, it's about the engagement, it's about the clicks, it's about the recognition from publishers. That's also a thing.
Yeah.
When you get the attention of a bigger publisher where it's like they value you, and value being like not in the quality way, but like they value the numbers that you can bring.
Right.
And you have to be so careful. I don't want to criticize any particular person. Like as people, we opt into the system. Right. And there's always this double dimension of what we're talking about. So it's like, I talk about a content creator, like the actual creator themselves. I love most of the creators I encounter. I really do. And that's what breaks my heart about you mentioned before about cynicism, where I feel like when we like in the context of that system, yeah, we look very much the same. And that generates that resistance that like, oh, well, here's a bunch of shows and here's a bunch of, they're just kind of, talking about this and here's,
right.
And I guess I reached out to you because I wanted to just have that conversation to, when we call ourselves content creators, what are we really like, what conversation are we short circuiting by just adopting that word uncritically? And I get it. People, maybe young people just love that word and that works for them. But from the perspective of somebody who is a capitalist critic. I'm a raging socialist. Sorry, people. I'm lefty as they come when it comes to this stuff. When it's like, and I a critic of commodification, like, and I come out from the mental health perspective. I mean, the people that are just exhausted by our system, the people that are just like, I asked them what do they're unemployed now. What are you going to do? It's like, I just have I just want to watch a bunch of Netflix and consume a bunch of things. There's like a whole world out there. Is there anything? Did volunteering disappear? Did walks in the park disappear? Like these things don't even enter into our brains because of the mindset, that bloodstream that we're in. And I feel like board games are a part of that. And you've triggered that in your writings. And it's like, that capitalist system, it's definitely kind of leaching out the color from what could be these amazing experiences and these amazing creators that are making amazing things.
Yeah.
To me. So I just wanted to have that conversation. I just wanted to kind of like unleash, like lift the cap off of.
Yeah, sure.
And okay, we make content. Well, let's really unpack what that means.
Right. Yeah, and it's a hard conversation for me to have because, I find that a lot of people seem very certain. I feel like I don't know anything half the time. When you talk about this kind of this compulsion to consume, this is something that I have some younger cousins who are more in the TikTok generation than I am, and I'm just blown away by the degrees of depression that they're feeling. Now, I'm not saying that I have no idea if there's more depression or anxiety now.
Oh, I know. Yes, it's way up.
Okay, so
it's
okay.
way up. No. I mean, we're talking like in the teens in terms of percentages, up, 14, 16, 18%, depending on the demographic, and among young people, and especially among young women, spiking, like really spike, because, the images of like, you have to be this interesting, you have to look like this, and you have to, and all these things, like the anxiety's up, depression's up, self-cutting, self-harm up, suicide up. I mean, all that stuff is up because I know this is like kind of beyond board gaming. Like, I'm not blaming board gaming or board gaming consecration or any of this stuff, but like, this is the bloodstream in which we are entering when we choose to say, I'm creating content, when we choose to create content and put it in that bloodstream.
Right.
That's happening there.
Where I'm coming from is I do work with some young people, but it's always but they are very explicitly at-risk young people. So to me, just everyone is anxious and depressed. So I can't gauge like the mainstream, is it more or is it less? And growing up, I was very anxious. And so to me, that's just the water in which I swim, right? So that's interesting to hear from someone with more experience that those are going up. So do you feel like there's something we can do to be part of the solution to add meaning to something that is otherwise maybe just zero, empty carbs?
Yeah, I mean, and that is, make meaningful content, approach content with intention. Like you mentioned before, like, when you first joined, it's like, I love board games, right? And so you come in, you love board games, and you want to make the content, and that's great. Like, let's do that. Do your thing, and produce your blog, and even if you imitate, even if it sucks. I think it was We're Not Wizards that kind of very off tweeted thing. Your first podcast will suck. Your first
right.
Suck, your first video will suck, but it's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay. After you get past that initial thing and you have either a following and you have that momentum, then I think it becomes important to really get in touch with your mission and your intention. Like, what is your intention with making this? And I don't know. I would like to invite people to, maybe the intention, the quantity stuff, is the intention, the attention of publishers, of people, and that rises above as numbers rise? Or is the intention to put something meaningful in that broader sense of the term? Is the intention to, in my case, make people think, in your case, inspire discovery, in Paula's case, make people laugh and make people think differently, and different, there's all sorts of ways in which people have meaningful stuff, but as long as it's done with intention and not just like, because that's what content is trying to steal. right? Aren't they trying to steal our intention? Aren't they trying to steal our
Right. Yeah,
attention?
I think there is that dimension to it, right? Like
You know,
let's take what it is and turn it into an infomercial to ship more product.
right? And once we've given in, once we've given them our intention, once we've given like we define our intention externally, like they won,
Yeah.
and that system, whatever that system is, has won. And it's funny to think of it like like board game publishers. Like it's so funny because like I know some of them. They're real people.
Yeah.
Like like AG Porfirio, Van Ryder, and yes, Sarah from Renegade, and all these. I know these are real people that I've broken bread. Frank West, from City of Games. These are all like really cool people. But it's such a hard thing because there's that other layer where it's like, oh, I'm creating value.
Yeah.
We're having a different conversation because now I have a bigger platform and I can create value for you. It's like, oh man,
Yeah.
wasn't like that. But like you said before, kind of as long as you there's no escaping that dynamic. Like I don't know what that you can truly be like an auteur. That you're. I don't know. Like
I think we are seeing that broadly. I think that the content creation sphere, for lack of a better word, or the media of board games, I think it is improving. I think we're seeing a lot fewer of those zero calories going around. I think that we're seeing a really interesting space where even just 10 years ago, I think there were only a small handful of people who were really approaching games thoughtfully and deliberately. And it tended to be pretty niche, like it was in war games, right?
yeah.
Because war games always they were always about a serious topic. So you would see people like actually having a discussion about like, well, this isn't modeled correctly. And, do we need the Nazis here? Questions like that. But now we're moving into, oh, run away, Kate. There's my
If you're
daughter.
listening to the podcast right now, one of Dan's daughters just popped into the screen.
So what was I even saying? Oh no, I just think we are seeing a lot more thoughtfulness. And I think that's great. We're seeing, some outlets that kind of do light and fluffy reviews have done very serious examinations of difficult topics. And I'm not saying that it has to be a serious examination of a difficult topic, but that's the lens I see this sort of thing through, is how well are we treating history? And I think we're doing a great job. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we are getting better on the whole. And that's encouraging. I think that if someone is wanting to start an outlet or a channel, start talking about board games now, it is a great time to do it. It's reached the point where it's percolated outward. Publishers are trying to be more sensitive about issues of representation and history and appropriation. And that was just not even an issue 10 years ago. No one was thinking about that.
And I'm going to slice the conversation in half right there. Those are our reflections on content and the concept of content. And then we get into a separate discussion, which I'm going to turn into a separate podcast on previews and, assessing previews and, paid previews and more reflective, hopefully deep thoughts and things that give you out there something to think about. So like I said, going to end the episode right here. Please stay tuned for the episode next week, which will be more with Dan Thurot, the Space-Biff. So if you could change your mind, you could change the world. So until next time, bye everybody.